Okay. Good morning from Bethesda, Maryland. We're back for the final session of this week. It's been a long but productive week. We actually are going to have two topics today. One, we're just going to get a brief update from Kai on the LCD work, and then we're going to finish up our review of 600. And we'll have Len lead us through the remainder of that. But Kai, I wanted to turn it over to you. First of all, thank you to the team for getting so much done in such a short period of time. I understand we're setting near all-time records in terms of volume of comments coming in. And then we're going to finish up our review of 600. And we'll, Michelle, something's reverberated. Okay, is this working again? So, sorry, did you hear that repeat? Okay, once is enough to hear it. So we get a significant amount of comments in on the last version. So as we go into this stage, I think we can't have that as a repeat, but I'll have Kai jump in here and give us an update.
Thank you, Tom. And I think as we said on earlier in the week, I think it was Wednesday, I think we do have a record number of comments on this. We are working through it and making great progress. But I think as we alluded to on Wednesday, we will need to bring the standard back to you in two parts. So today you will get, first you'll get the revised standard up, or including part 8, the conforming amendments, the preface and the definitions and so on. And then you'll get part 9 a little bit later, maybe even on Saturday, or part 9 on reporting maybe a bit later, maybe even on Saturday. Remember that we did have a deadline for you to come back with us on comments on that version on Sunday at 4 p.m. We have moved that forward so that you would still get the time necessary to review. So that timeline is now moved to Monday at noon. So that's the supplements. And they are not to be voted on, but they will come through on Sunday, as we indicated earlier. Consultation sessions. Remember again to schedule them. I think we have a deadline to schedule them for today. So if you want to schedule a consultation session, please do so by I don't remember the timeline we set, but it's in the email that we had earlier. Bev, do you remember the timeline for the?
Yeah, well, they won't have the standard. So if you just schedule one, and then if you need to cancel, then we can cancel it.
Yeah. That's good. I think that's the other parts of this slide is basically the same as you saw the other day. The final round of the standard based on the comments that we then get on noon Monday, we will provide you on Tuesday, and that will be the version that we're voting on. And remember also the version, or on the vote, we will vote on the standard and the appendices, but the supplemental guide is not part of the vote itself. So I think that's the update we wanted to provide. Anything you want to add to that, Bev?
No. Let me clarify, Kai. This is a fatal flaw review, right? So I just want to say, in the context of the previous comments, that from a fatal flaw review standpoint, please be disciplined in terms of what a fatal flaw review is. Nice to haves really aren't particularly helpful at this juncture, particularly when you think about 18 members, including their nice to haves. It really has to be, there's a problem with the language here. It's gonna, or the articulation will cause confusion and therefore improper application, potentially improper application of our intent. Is that a fair assessment of how we would like comments to be received, Billy?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I thought actually this morning about something that you always like to tell the staff team, is that don't let perfect be the enemy of good. I think this is exactly where we are at this point. And I think when we look at fatal flaws, it is really just ask yourself, is this so significant that I cannot support the release of this document? That is what we mean by fatal flaw. We have used that in a few emails that we've sent to you over the past year or so when we asked for fatal flaw review, but that's the lens you need to look through. Is a matter so significant that you cannot support the release of the document? And if you can separate those out from any other comments you have, because depending on the volume that comes in, we will first look at those that are fatal flaw, and maybe ask that if we don't get to any others, that we can process those as a matter of course. But the ones that are the critical ones are those ones that are so significant that you cannot support the release of the document.
I think that's a really nice way to put it. You know, I know that for many of you, you have people helping you out, and you know, people are trying to do their best, but I think it's up to board members to serve as a filter in the way that Billy explained it. The risk is why I really feel passionately about this is that each change that may be important for some may have unintended consequences for others, and getting to the final review, seeing a lot of red line in it is disconcerting, and makes it harder for other people to consider their position in the long term. So obviously we want comments when they're of significant nature, but please be judicious. Any questions or comments on where we are on LCE for either Kai or Bev or me or Billy? We're happy with that game plan. So if you're outside the Americas, you basically have to close a business on Monday now to respond. If you're in the Americas, you get to noon, except Fernando, who's an hour behind. He gets to 11, early lunch. Josephine.
Apologies, I had some major incident behind me of a cat and dog chasing each other. I just want to understand the timing if I can. I totally understand the fatal flaw and absolutely will comply. But the timing of the Tuesday one is obviously very important, because for the Europeans, it would literally be overnight for us, I think. So could you give me an idea, please, of what time the Friday Part 8 and conforming amendments are coming in from the US perspective, and then what time on Tuesday? Thank you.
Bev, are you best placed to respond?
Yeah, so we'll release it all today up to Part 8, the conforming amendments. That'll all come, but it'll be later today. So Josephine, unlikely during your day. And then on Tuesday, we will endeavor to get it as early as we can. We still want to try and get it, because recognizing that people need time with it before Wednesday. But there's two things. There's the volume that comes through that we have to process, and then the volume that you have to look at. So we'll do our very best on Monday night to get it to you as early as we can.
Thank you. Thanks, Bev.
Okay, any more LC comments?
Just one thing, Tom, I think as I pointed out yesterday or Wednesday was when we talked about getting the comments, if we on the next round can get all the comments as comments in Word and not changes directly in the Word document, that would be ease the process for us very much.
Thank you. Any questions on that? Okay, I think that's very clear. Sorry to be a little preachy there. It's just a matter of trying to make it as efficient as possible for everyone. Thank you, Bev and team, for processing and considering all the comments. Len, I'm going to turn it over to you. We're back to 600.
Thank you, Tom. And I'm also happy to say good morning from Bethesda, Maryland, as Tom also said earlier. So I'm now in Beijing this month, so happy to be home doing a call. I want to start by thanking all the comments we have received so far. I think many of the comments are very helpful, and I think the task force and staff really appreciate the thoughtful comments that we have seen. and we'll definitely spend some time going through them. But those comments have been very helpful, and thank you for spending the time and give us those comments. And also congratulations on Netherlands. They won yesterday. Hopefully our orange choice was helpful. But today we need to be very mindful because it's England and plays Scotland today, and so we're not taking sides because Josephine and Jamie are both working task force. So, but good luck to both. It'll be a great game. So it was really good to have that discussion yesterday on a number of issues. I think the task force received clear direction from the board on some of the topics that we needed the board's direction, and also confirming the task force views to take it forward. So thank you very much. Today we're going to start with paragraph 45A, and that's in the issues paper. If you look at that starts in paragraph 37. Just before we start taking comments, maybe just some background information. As part of a process to understand some of the comments we heard in the documentation area, the task force spent a lot of time going through those comments. Also, as I said yesterday, we, including Willie and Tom, I think we had sessions with IFIA and PIOB, and from those discussions, as part of the documentation's considerations, the task force went back and looked at some of the comments we heard in the ED and also subsequent comments. A number of areas dealing with the documentations relate to, how do I say this, is focusing on the importance of group auditors to review of component auditors documentation. So the task force did some thinking and moved some paragraphs around. Some of the paragraphs you're going to see in agenda paper 4C. We introduced a new paragraph in that 45 sections, and also added a number of application materials. So in essence, that we're adding paragraph A112C to provide link to ISO 220. I think it's important to know that the engagement partners determined the type of documentation reviewed deal with the timing, nature, extent of the work they do as part of discharging their DSR responsibilities. We're also revising paragraph A113 to refer to paragraph A51 to include some of the factors that group auditors may need to take into account in tailoring those nature, timing, extent of the DSR of the component auditors to the facts and circumstances of the group audit. And some of the remaining points in paragraph A113 were recast as other factors that may affect the nature, timing, extent of group auditors determination in accordance with now the paragraph 45A. So we are talking about 45A now, but some of the reasonings to lead to the change came from maybe later in our discussion today, dealing with the documentations. So I take that the board members have time to read through the issues paper in our section 1A area dealing with documentation, and the specific dealing with the changes in 45A is in paragraph 37 of the issues paper that outlines what I just summarized. So with that, let me just pause here a little bit. I want to make sure that I know Dan and Jasper spent our time on this. Is there anything you would like to supplement what I just described as a background information before we go into a discussion?
From my perspective, I don't think so, Lynn. I think that that's a good summary, and we'll see what the board comments are, and then we can come back and add any clarification points as needed.
Okay, Tom, so I'll turn it to you for board's comments.
And Len, just to be clear, this was an area that attracted significant public interest scrutiny from the regulatory and other investor communities as an area of focus for us. Is that correct?
That's correct. I did talk about subsequent to the March meeting, the session with IFIA and in our discussion with PIOB. These are the issues. The 45A plus the documentation. That's the area of the focus, especially. These are the types of public interest comments that we need to address. You're right, Tom.
Yeah, it was, as I remember the IFIR letter, it was one of their top 3 comments on this. And this was also raised in our PIOB discussions at the last PIOB meeting we had with them as well. Okay, any other comments? Okay, I'll welcome input from the board on the paragraphs beginning with 45A through requirement 46 and then related application material. Wendy.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm actually chiming in today to say that I am really impressed with the response to this section. I usually don't come in when I don't have dissenting views, but I think this was responsive. So I want to say that I'm content with 45A and 112C to A113. Thank you.
I'm sure the task force appreciates your chiming in on that. Thank you, Wendy. Diane.
Hi there. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. My comment, and again, I agree with Wendy. I thought, again, very responsive. One of the things I would ask the task force to think about is when I look at 45A little b, absolutely appreciate the importance of the group auditor evaluating the competence and capability of the component teams. Absolutely don't disagree with that. I understand it. I think what would be helpful for the practitioner is how will that be done and how will that be documented in the file? And so, if I think about how I do it, we would have requirements in our component auditors, if they're working on a PCAOB audit, that they've taken the requisite training. As the partner on the primary team, I'm going to ask to see the certificates that training was complete so that I have some confidence in their competence and their knowledge of PCAOB auditing. I may keep those documents in my file. That may be something that I document that I did, but trying to just get maybe a little bit more clarity on what is the expectation. And they could just be in the form of suggestions, but I do think that'll be helpful to the practitioner. I also think in terms of a regulator coming in and looking at these files, everybody having a clear idea as to what is the expectation and what is the extent of documentation that should be in there. So again, learning certificates, can it be done through just communication, reviewing work papers, what have you. But if you could just think about that, I think that would be helpful. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Diane. Sachka?
Thank you very much. I also think this is very responsive to the comment we received. So I support the direction. But I have one additional suggestion. And my suggestion is perhaps we can think about moving the description of paragraph A113 small c to paragraph 45A big A as well, in addition to small a and small b, because I think when the group auditor determines whether and the extent to which they need to review the component auditor's documentation, I think it is important to also consider the information that the group auditor has already obtained from the component auditor, such as the information from the deliverables including memorandum, because if the matter the group auditor wants to review has already been included in other deliverables from the component auditor to the group auditor at the request from the group auditor, I think it is not always necessary for the group auditor to review the relevant part of the component auditor's work paper itself. As described in the issue paper, I understand that the task force does not want to incorporate the factors in paragraph A113 to the requirement to avoid the checklist approach, but I believe the small c is also an important factor and beneficial point to be considered. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Shall we?
Thank you, Tom, and good evening from Singapore. First of all, I just want to support what Diane and Sachiko have said, the comments they've made. I have one other sort of smallish comment. I was slightly hesitant to bring this up because it was in the ED, and I don't sort of recall seeing a lot of comments on that. But on A113, the current D, we'll talk about the fact that component auditors' documentation have been subject to their firm's policy and procedures for review of audit documentation. I'm just looking at it again, and I'm not sure if it's obvious how the group auditor is supposed to take this into consideration. Do they try to understand what the component auditor firm's policy and procedures are? Do they get a confirmation that he has been subject to the appropriate level of direction and supervision? Do they look at selected documentation to be comfortable with the level of direction and supervision? So it's just a little bit vague to me, not entirely helpful. I'm just wondering whether the task force can have a look to see whether maybe further clarity can be shared on it. That'll be all from me. Thanks.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Jean-Louis. Maybe an instance where, as you know, my pet peeve of passive voice comes into play because it doesn't talk about what the group auditor's action in that place. It says was subjected to. But that's something for the task force to consider. That's the last hand I have up. Vili, is there anything that in the comments you reviewed that we've missed?
Yes, thank you, Tom. The only other thing that I picked up in the comments that we received is there was a comment that we should maybe just think about, or the question was asked. If you look at paragraph 45A, it says the group auditor shall determine whether and the extent to which it is necessary. So the comment was whether that is not too open, if I can put it like that. And I just want to give a little bit perspective on that, and then happy to have Dan chime in as well and get the board's views. I understand this, that when you get to the review of the component auditor's documentation, this is a product of the direction, supervision, and review requirement in ISA 220 in any case, and it will be dependent on the nature and circumstances of each group audit engagement, because you're going to get group engagements with very few components, but you're also going to get group engagements with many, many, many components. And where the reality is that numerous factors have to be considered in determining the extent of your review, including whether you're going to review component auditor documentation. So my reading of the requirement is that the expectation is that the group auditor will have to make a positive determination of which components are going to be reviewed, which component documentation is going to be reviewed, and then if so, the extent to which. And I think that was the intent of the task force. So Dan, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
That is a very good summary, Vili, of the intent of that paragraph, and it relates back, as you mentioned, and as Len mentioned, in the linkages to ISA 220, links back to paragraph 23, and it starts there with the group engagement partner's responsibility for the nature, timing, and extent of the direction, supervision, and review of the component auditors, and taking into account the assessed risks of material misstatement and the like. And then it also links with paragraph 49 in terms of the overall evaluation of whether sufficient appropriate audit evidence has been obtained, including with respect to the work of the component auditors. So paragraph 45A is really, as you mentioned, it's that determination based on those factors that are in paragraph A51 and then A113 as to where the deeper dive in terms of the documentation, review of the documentation of the component auditors is needed. So it's all of those paragraphs working together, just as you described.
So I guess the question that you say is, does the board agree with the intent as you describe it? And then is the language written precisely enough to allow the execution of the intent, or does it require more clarity, and would it benefit from some more clarity? That's how I interpret the issue about before the board. Is that a fair assessment? Really? Okay. Any comments?
I think that's correct. Those are the two components.
Yeah. So I'm seeing nods. Do people agree with the intent?
Yeah.
Now the second question is, could it be written more clearly, or is it as it's written? Diane, you're nodding your head that implying that we could refine the language here.
Yeah, and I think when you do that, it's scalable, right? There's a wide range of possibilities, depending on the nature of the job, what auditing standard you're on, the industry, you may want to make sure you've got the right industry expertise. So it is a wide scale out there. I just think and they can be examples of what teams should consider in terms to be responsive to the requirement.
Sue?
I actually felt that what was there, I'm sure it's iterative and it could be developed, but I was comfortable with what was there. I think the more we start building examples in, I'd wonder whether that was maybe more something for application or for implementation guidance. So it's a really hard balancing act, but I thought that what was there captured a lot of the key themes and the flexibility.
Julie?
I'm in the same place as Sue. I'm worried that trying to rephrase it might lose the messaging and the intent that I understood it to mean. So I guess I would just be cautious of changing it too much, because I think what was there was okay.
Okay, Sachika?
Thank you. I'm also with Sue and Julie. I think the current wording is principle enough and very simple to understand. So I think maybe this is okay. Thank you.
So I get the current wording is, I guess Diane was suggesting some targeted application guidance, or others have suggested implementation materials. I guess, Josephine, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but oftentimes where this comment is coming up, it seems like, is the interpretation of the regulatory community and the practitioner community, and whether there is the potential for friction there because of different interpretations of this. I don't know if you have a perspective on the spot, or whether this is something for further exploration of the task force.
Thank you, Tom. No, I think it's actually spot on. I think it perfectly echoes what the requirement is in ISO 220. And I think that I can see how you could say that's too broad, but it is broad because all circumstances are different. Every audit is different, and consequently, the nature, the time and extent of your review is going to vary. So, which is exactly what Diane was saying earlier. So I think I'm perfectly comfortable with it as it is.
Okay, I think where we got to here is the task force is always going to look to refine language if there's inconsistencies. We could provide clarity, and then you'll think about both the benefit and potential unintended consequences of it, provided additional examples, application guidance, and where it fits is whether it's in the 8 paragraphs or outside in first time implementation materials or the like. Is that a fair assessment? Billy, do you think we've, since you raised the issue that you saw coming up in the offline comments, do you feel like it's gotten a full airing?
Yes, Scott, Tom, I'm satisfied. Thank you. Okay.
People are satisfied. And there are a couple of other comments, but generally, people feel that this section is being responsive to the public interest concerns that we heard at IFER and with the PIOB. I don't know, Michael, since we're talking about some of the feedback we got at PIOB, I hope you perceive that we're grappling with this issue and giving it an airing, but I welcome your input if you have anything to add.
No, not on the specifics of where you've come to on it. It's clear that a lot of attention's been given to try to accommodate the comments that have come from the PIOB and other stakeholders. And I do agree that it's always possible to refine wording, but that you need to, at some point, be careful that you haven't passed the optimal point and gone to making things less clear. So that's, I think things are going in a good direction.
Thank you very much. Okay, Len, back to you. I don't know if you want to comment on anything we heard, and then afterwards, feel free to move to the next section.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for the support. We didn't hear from all the board members, but I get a sense that also from the offline comments, there have been a lot of support in terms of what we do in this area. I think it's very important because this is a key public interest comment. So do appreciate the positive support for the changes we've made in this part of standards. And I know, Dan, you mentioned about having additional application material dealing with paragraph 45A little b. We'll take a look at the suggestion, but that for example, that elsewhere in the standards, for example, paragraph A40 and elsewhere, and also in the documentation section 57, we'll go back and look at whether we can link that better. Perhaps that can address your issues. There's one suggestion from Sashiko about moving paragraph 113 little c to requirement. I just want, see, Sashiko raised it, just want to be responsive also, whether we can at least get some consensus, so we don't have to need to have a full debate in a task force and bring it back. So can I, Tom, just ask for any other views in terms of whether they'll be supportive of Sashiko's suggestion to move that A133, 113 little c to the requirement? Just want to get other board members' view before we spend time looking at it.
Maybe I'll put it another way.
Mm-hmm.
Does any board member have a concern with moving it? Josephine, is that you have a concern, or the yes is for you like the idea of moving it? Okay.
I have a concern moving it. Thank you.
You have a concern? Okay, let's hear it.
Well, partly for the reasons that we've just discussed, I think that 45A is actually spot on. I have a concern that if we move A113C into the requirements, we dilute the focus and the considerations that the group auditor has in 45A. It's implicit that when you're thinking about what you need to review, you already take into account what you already have and have reviewed. And I think it would muddy the waters if we brought that in as a part of that requirement. Thank you.
Okay, Josephine. Julie?
I'm in the same place as Josephine, and I think it's already covered by what's there in 45 big A and then little a. So I would be, I'm happy with the way it is.
Roger?
Yeah, I'm with Julie. I think it's covered by 45A, little a. So I think it's covered, and we're starting to get into a checklist. So I think it is diluting.
Kai?
Same point, so I won't repeat, but I'm with the others here.
Okay. Such Fernando's nodding his head. It sounds like you're in the same position, Joe.
Same page.
Kai, I mean, Sachiko, having heard the others come in here, are you persuaded at all on that point?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure we took this. So we'll leave it as is. You got clear guidance there, Len. Let's move to the next section.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Very, very helpful. Good discussion. Okay, so next section will be on the slide 15. This section deal with some of the other issues that the task force are working through: subsequent events, stand back, auditor's report, communication with the group management, those in charge of governance. So we heard a few comments in this area, and in the issues paper, we outlined those issues, type of issues we heard, and also the task force views and recommendations. Of course, we made some changes in some of the paragraphs, particularly A150, 15A, paragraph 49, and A118 to address some of the key comments and make some clarifications. Then also make some changes to I guess the new requirement in paragraph 53A and related application materials on the communication with group management and those in charge of governance. On specifics on the group audit plan, I think we talked about 17A having that group audit strategy, group audit plan, and so we feel that it's a requirement that has to be communicated to the group management as well. So with that, Tom, on slide, you're seeing the number of paragraphs involved. I'll take them in one big batch because some of the changes are for more clarifications.
Okay, this is almost everything up to the documentation paragraphs, right? So, okay, Sue?
Just a couple of quick points. In A115B, which is talking about the overall summary memorandum reporting back to the group auditor, that still retains a reference to a summary memorandum or report. And I've raised it previously. The piece about report is confusing in practice because people are then looking at what kind of report. So if we're able to remove that, I think consistent with what we've done elsewhere, that would be very helpful. And then in 53A, which is communication with group management, we suggested perhaps a look at the wording, because as I read it, the group audit plan, as described in the application material, seems to be seems to have quite a lot of administrative material. And I think the point about the communication to group management is about communication of the overview of the work that's going to be performed at the components, rather than perhaps some of the other more detailed areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie?
Thank you. A few things, Len. Paragraph 47, I think, might suffer from the what we talked about yesterday, which is it already refers to taking responsibility. The group auditor takes responsibility, And then we've added in words around including as appropriate, requesting component auditors to perform procedures. I think that's duplicative. I think that taking responsibility, if I understand it right, already allows the group auditor discretion for that. So maybe just take a look at that paragraph again. In A115 big A, at the very end of the bullet, and to be consistent with that discussion we just had on 45A, and maybe just take a look at that and make sure that it is consistent with 45A, because we have a couple of references in there to reviewing work, but it would be reviewing work as applicable in accordance with 45A. So that one probably just needs another look at to make sure we're not saying something inconsistent with 45 big A. And then I think in 53A, I guess I was just curious about the addition in 53 big A. So maybe it's a bit of a question back to you, Len, or the task force. This would seem to be additional to what we would do in a single entity audit. So I was just wondering about the need for this addition in 53 big A. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. See no other hands. Len, do you want to respond to those comments?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Those were helpful suggestions on A115B. We'll take a look, and also maybe some inconsistencies that Julie mentioned. We'll go back and take a look. On the new requirement 53A, I think that the task force discussion has been that because the complexities involved, because when we look at from a risk-based approach, identifying components, how auditors look at the operations, the management structures, and also how financial reportings are being done. There's an addition of complexity. It's one of the special consideration that in addition to a single entity audit, we feel that perhaps that would be an area that the group management need to be aware of. So that's our reason for having that new requirement, but also hearing from in our outreach that people feel strongly that that should be one of the special consideration. So that's why we propose that requirement, and that's not in the single entity audit, because the nature, the complexity, and how you plan your work and identifying components, those are we feel that this is a try to meet the public interest of comments we heard. But or just wondering whether other board members have any comments on the new requirement 53A in addition to what Julie has asked.
Julie has her hand up.
Yeah, Tom, I just wanted to maybe respond to Len. Thank you, Len, for that. I think that assumes, though, that groups are complex, and I don't think all groups are complex. I think the standard could be applied to a very simple group audit, and there wouldn't be. I guess I'm just wondering if we built something in here that assumes all groups are complex, when I don't think that's going to be the case.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Julie. So maybe we'll take that scalability issues back to a task force. Maybe we can think about maybe some wording, and also maybe application materials to address your issues. We'll take a look.
Okay. Next section.
Okay. So the next section, slide number 16, I think, is it's going to be on documentation. As you recall from the heat map we presented yesterday, the single red area was the risk-based approach. Documentation is a yellow area, at least based on the feedback we heard in the exposure period. But it's very important to know that one of the key public interest comments in the whole ISA 600 project is to make sure we address some of the documentation issues that has been identified by the regulators, as well as the practitioners that are seeking additional clarification and guidance in documentation. In the issues paper, we take the board member have read it. Overall, based on the ED's responses, we receive a lot of support. I think the principle has always been ISA 230 is the foundational standards to documentation, and the concept of experienced auditor is important, and that the other documentation requirements elsewhere in the ISAs, in other foundational standards such as ISA 220, 315, 330, 300, and others. So the task force has been very focused in terms of introducing. We're not going to add more requirements than we should. And one of the core principles for this project has always been that people has been just laser sharp looking at ISA 600, looking for guidance rather than looking at other standards. So over the last few weeks, also based on the feedback we heard from the board in March, and then having additional discussion with IFIA and PIOB, I think our direction is still the same, but there are certain areas I think a task force has heard enough from particularly the regulatory community is maybe there should be more needs to be done in paragraph 57. So we have spent a lot of time on documentation. So more specifically, there's a number of paragraphs, also rearranging a paragraph in this area. So just want to highlight, as you also part of the issues papers that we provided to you is the appendix 3 in the agenda 4. That we try to address some of the comments we heard and how the task force, based on our discussion, disposition of some of those comments we heard. But it's very important to highlight that the importance of the public interest comments and what we heard from IFIA particularly and the PIOB in our discussion. So a number of paragraphs, as I said, we have done a number of changes. I think rather than going through the changes one by one, because there's a lot of them, we take it that you have spent some time reading it and digest the information we provide to you in the issues paper and also the appendix 3. I think that we probably want to save the time for more fulsome discussion from the board members and in hearing your views on these sections. Unless that certain areas that needs additional clarifications, Tom, I would suggest that we reserve the time hearing from the board in terms of what we have done in these sections based on the comments we heard back in March. Also, some of the comments we heard from a public interest perspective, dealing with what we also have gone through in terms of 45A, bring that actions in terms of direction supervision review and the review of the component auditors documentations. is part of overall rearranging and clarification in the documentation sections. So Tom, I would suggest we go to the board member for specific comments.
Okay. I think board members focus on, are we being responsive to what we heard in March and to what we received in terms of input from IFER and other public interest commentators, public commentators on the topic. So taking 57 and the related application material as a whole. Any hands on this section? Okay, Diane?
Yep, I have 2 points. One is in paragraph A127. I like the paragraph. My only suggestion, again, similar to my comments earlier, is maybe some additional direction, steering the practitioner as to how they would operationalize this and execute. And some examples might be, you might say, listen, we think it's important that you look at the areas of significant risk, the areas of fraud risk. We think you should look and make sure you understand revenue. So again, I'm cautious to bring this up in terms of additional application material, additional guidance, but I do think that would be helpful to set expectations to kind of steer the auditor as to what they should be looking at. Again, it will be judgment and it will be scalable and it will vary from job to job, but just a thought on that. And then in paragraph 127A, I'm fine with it with the exception of one small thing, which is in the 4th line, all the way over to the right in parentheses. And this is when you're talking about, it may make sense to keep certain of the component work papers in the group auditor work papers. And we say paren for ease of accessibility. I actually think they should be retained in the group audit work papers to support, because they're necessary to support the group audit opinion. This point in particular is really important. This is an issue on many inspections where the group auditor is challenged to say, how did you reach your opinion? I don't see any evidence in your work paper where you considered the IT evaluation, for instance, at one of your larger components. And so I think I would anchor that a little bit more to those work papers should be retained in the group if they are necessary to support the overall audit opinion. And that will then help everybody, because the practitioner can say, yep, I've got the papers, I reviewed them, I've carried them forward to my file. So that was my only comment on that paragraph, was to strike the for ease of accessibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Isabel.
Yes, sorry. Hello, everybody. In paragraph 57, we were expecting to see something regarding ethics and independence. In paragraph 20b, we have work to do on the fact that the component auditor will comply with the ethics rules that are applicable to the engagement and that they are independent. So maybe we could add something, because it's something that the group auditor will have to do and document. So we could have it here. And my other comment was more difficulties to understand the word residing in paragraph A124. I don't think it's usual to use that word in our standards. So some people really wanted to know what it meant. Is it equivalent to retained, or do we mean something different? Thank you.
Thank you. Sue?
Thanks. And I think this is responsive to the feedback, and I recognise that it's a very important public interest point, and it's also an area where we get a lot of practical considerations. And I'm probably actually with Diane on some of this, because there are a lot of quite challenging practical situations where I think in this case it would probably be helpful to have a little bit more spelt out to be able to help the practice in terms of application. It's where we've had some implementation feedback or potential implementation feedback. I mentioned yesterday the piece about documentation of risk assessment, particularly where a component auditor has undertaken some of the elements of risk assessment, and the extent to which the group audit file needs to contain an overview or the detailed work. We have A124, which the second bullet there is talking about inclusion of the component auditor's working papers as part of the group audit documentation. And I'd ask the task force to perhaps reflect on how that is potentially operationalized in the context where there are legal restrictions around access. I know there's a few references, but that is very much a practical consideration. And then finally, a few questions around new and upcoming standards, so 315 and 220, which are not effective yet. But there are considerations about how that will flow into a particular group situation. So as I say, I think this is an area where it is so important that perhaps adding a little bit more would be valuable. Thank you.
Thank you. Chong-Wei?
Thank you, Tom. First of all, support what Diane and Sue have said about further implementation guidance and support to the A127A. Then just two quick comments. First of all, A123B, I find it a little bit odd to have that. So do we have that in every single standard where we have additional documentation requirements? So I understand we're trying to be responsive to the concerns that have been raised. So if we want to retain it, that's fine. But I just want, especially the second sentence, where we talk about the appendix, I just don't see what value it adds. So if we retain this, then maybe we can consider just removing the second sentence. Second comment on A124, and especially the second bullet point. Now, again, I understand this meant to clarify that component auditor's documentation need not be retained in the group auditor's file, and we have the A127A that sort of explained further. But I wonder if it might be read to mean that the group auditor has a heightened responsibility over ensuring that the component auditor's documentation in their file are complete, properly retained, and archived in the same way that they would ensure that their group auditor file is. So the robustness of that check. And in some cases, we know that the group auditor may not even have seen those component auditors' documentation apart from what they have reported in the summary memorandum. So just wondering if the way the AM is now written, would this be interpreted to demand a higher level of involvement, direction, and supervision? So maybe just have a look again at whether this caused the same confusion that it has caused in me in other people. So that'll be all. Thanks.
Okay. I know that the task force will want to react to some of that. Roger?
Yeah, I just want to come in and support what the task force has done. I think they've done an excellent job in responding to the public interest element. Len, you and I have had many discussions on documentation going back a while now, and the big public interest element it is in our jurisdiction. I see what you've done as being very responsive, particularly thank you for the additional application material you've put in A124. Appreciate that. The only thing we had was a couple of editorials which we've sent through to you. I can hear the desire for implementation, but I don't think there's too much implementation material, but I don't think there's too much change required here. I think this has been very responsive, so congratulations from me.
Okay. I'd like to invite anyone else. Is there anyone, so it seems like general support for the direction of the board, but is there anyone who thinks that requirements are not robust enough or need some further clarification? Imran? You're on mute, Imran. Okay. Len, Imran, I thought you had your hand up.
Oh, I did have my hand up. Sorry, I didn't hear you calling.
Yeah, we called on you. Sorry about that. Feel free to come.
Hello.
We're here. We hear you. You look a little frozen right now. Maybe give you a second to catch up. There was a comment about 123B. I guess my concern about removing it is that it actually sort of is the big key linkage here that needs to say what happens if we remove it. You sort of things fall apart a little bit. I don't know, Len, if you had the same impression.
Yeah, I think 123B is very important. I think from very beginning, ISO 230 is the foundational standards. Everything we do dealing with documentation start with 230. That's number one. Number two is, the linkage to other standards is very important. There are a number of the documentation requirements elsewhere outside ISO 600, and that when you do a group audit, you're not just applying ISO 600 alone. There are other requirements, especially on documentation, you have to comply. So it's important to emphasize those foundational standards, also linkage to ISO 230. So the task force feel very strongly, especially after hearing from the public interest members, as well as our discussion with some of the regulatory communities and PIOB. We think that paragraph is very important to actually, it's an important piece of puzzle to fit everything linking to 230 and the foundational standards.
People, any counterpoint of view on that?
So, sorry, Tom. So I raised that point, and as I mentioned, I understand that this is trying to be responsive to the comments received. I find it odd. I still find it odd, but I understand if we need to retain it. I just didn't find the second sentence particularly helpful. So maybe just have a look. And again, it's not a fatal point for me.
Okay. Thank you. Obviously, the task force will think about whether you need further refinement or not. Imran, I see you're back. I wanted to let you have the floor.
Thank you, Tom, and good afternoon, board. Friday afternoon is not a good time, but I appreciate the opportunity to weigh in a little bit on this. It sounds like it's been another good discussion so far. I've had some update from my technical advisor, Cynthia. Arriving in the meeting that's running like this is like trying to land a skateboard on a cruise ship, but I'll do my best to not go backwards in any direction. I really appreciate, Len, that you've kept this conversation around documentation open, and you've had so much of outreach in the intervening period around it, particularly around the monitoring group members and their insights, and it was good to read about that in the issues paper. I've sent comments in writing, and my general sense is that 57 and all the application materials really taking me much closer to where I'd like to be. So really supportive of what you have done. But for the purpose of public record, I think I need to record a few of these points. The first, though, would be to pick up on the points that Diane made, particularly the last of her points that they made. I thought she described that in a way that I've been battling to find the words to describe in the same way. And I thought there was a very neat description of what exactly she said would be great to find in the file. So if you're able to revisit Diane's comments, I really appreciate that. And maybe that would cover what I'm trying to get at. The second point relates to paragraph 57D, the paragraph that you've now developed, the bit that's added on, which of course references the paragraph 45A, on which you had an extensive conversation just now, but I was absent for. And I appreciate that they work together. So I'm going to make this point about how it works together. My worry about how 45A links to D is that, is there not a potential within 45A for 45A to be a loophole to therefore get away from what D is asking us to do, particularly because 45A has that language which makes it conditional, which makes that requirement conditional. Now, what that means to me is that that language that is in 45A, the language that says whether and the extent to which, is not language that is typically in requirements in our standards. So the extent to which is words that we know, but they typically appear in application material, and they talk about other people's responsibilities when we use extent to which. The extent to which internal auditors have done something, the extent to which management has done something, or the extent to which the financial reporting framework has done something. It's not often that we have such a critical requirement that hangs on this big judgment item, the extent to which, because the extent to which, of course, is everything from 0 to 100. And so somebody could realistically argue and therefore do no work in that area. Or well, someone who doesn't mean well could argue and therefore do no work in that area. And therefore D, what we're talking about now, 57D, could come up with nothing. So that's the point I want to reiterate, linking the two together. I guess what's left to know when all of this settles, and I appreciate that we've heard comments about one, I beg your pardon, on 124, and also comments we've heard around, that when all of that is settled, Len, are we comfortable, therefore, that all of the special considerations within the standard are covered by 57's documentation requirements? And I think that's a great test. If we're happy with everything up to 56, if 57 covers it in documentation requirement, then we've really closed the loop perfectly on it. And where anything is missing, I imagine that for the task force, we'll look at to close that gap. Lastly, and I have provided this comment in writing. I wish I had a better copy of what it is that I was going to say here. But when we look at how 57 is laid out, it's laid out as a responsibility of the group audit. It's laid out as a responsibility of the group auditor and not a responsibility of the group engagement partner. So there is here, of necessity, a description that falls solely on this group, the group auditor, and not the subset of this group, which is the engagement partner. And we know that there are other requirements in the standard where we've pointed a finger very directly as our board for very specific reasons about what the group engagement partner needs to do in this area. I asked the question, what of that which sits within 57 is the responsibility of the group engagement partner? And it's a challenge put to me by my inspectors, saying what were we expected to see here? And I'm not sure that I have a clear enough answer, other than, you know what this means. Group auditor means all of these people together, so someone in the team must get around to doing this. And I guess what they're concerned about here is linking it to ISO 220 and about that direct involvement in this person in actually looking at the paper at some point in the life of the audit engagement, and that they're not a helicopter or remote control audit partner responsible for the big group and just leaves the work to someone else to do. So a short way to say that is that everything in 57 is directed now to the group auditor. What then is the precise responsibility of the group engagement partner? I understand in the large bank scenario where, and of course, thousands of other similar cases, they must be around the world, where the group engagement partner cannot be expected to look at the file and many documents. But I'm curious to know whether 57 as formulated could allow the group engagement partner to get away with doing little or nothing. That would be the risk, whether they can get away with doing little or nothing, and thus be contrary to our intentions in 220 or the earlier duties that we've assigned to the group engagement partner. And we may want to think about that correlation. There are places in the standard where we ask the group engagement partner to do it, but when it came to the documentation, we don't expect that person to do it. So just a principal point there. I may have it technically all wrong and happy to be clarified, so I know how to go back and explain this point myself to the people who've asked me. Thank you very much.
Imran, I think Josephine has a question to ask, just for clarification.
Sorry, just apologies, Imran. I heard you say, what is the group engagement partner's responsibility in respect to the requirement in paragraph 57? So can I confirm this? Because this is documentation requirement paragraph. So it is therefore what is required to be documented, just as it would be in 230, etc. So I just want to clarify, are you saying that there should be certain things that should be physically documented by the group engagement partner in paragraph 57? Or are you linking your point to something elsewhere in the standard? So thank you, because I think this is an important point to clarify. Thank you, Tom.
Imran? Yeah, I mean, you're on mute.
Yes. So Josephine, I think that's the point I'm getting to. I'm understanding, and I appreciate that this how this evolved in this way, that the language of group auditor in 57 translates into the group engagement partner and members of the engagement team. I'd like to understand whether in that or in the application material, the role of that individual, the signing partner, in relation to anything in relation to documentation is clearly understood. Do they have to do anything?
Okay, thank you, Imran.
And I guess the question is what's the task force's intent as currently written, and does it satisfy Imran? And not to say that it has to or has not, that's for board discussion, but someone want to talk about the task force position on this?
Yeah, Tom. I think everyone, thank you for clarifying, and thank you for Josephine ask those questions. But you know, just if you look at paragraph 6 of the standards, ISO 600, I think that's pretty much the framework we're working on in terms of bringing that 220, the involvement piece into 600. It's not just about documentation, but you know, the taking responsibility of the engagement partner, as well as the assignment to the experienced team members to perform certain parts of audit. I think that's a framework based on what's given to us from 220. We write all the special considerations for these standards, not just documentation alone. So your response to addressing Josephine's question is helpful. You know, we'll take that on board. But as you said, you know, we are pointing to other standards, but that just shouldn't be the way out. But it is important that the entire body of ISAs that some of the key principle foundations understanding came from other standards. Your other comments on 124, we received that offline comments. You know, we as a task force, we have a lot of discussion and debate, and we faithfully you know, or try to address your concern. And the other one is you mentioned 45A. We just had that discussion. Fortunately, you were in the room, but overall, based on the board discussion so far, I think there was a lot of support in terms of what we have done in 45A. But I'm just wondering, are there anything specific in 45A you want to raise it? Because at least give you the opportunity. I think in preparing for that session, I think Willie and had expressed your comments in the main public sessions, and Dan has also came in with a further explanation in terms of try to address your comments in 45A. So Tom, I wasn't sure whether we need to explain to Willie how we landed in 45A.
So I updated Imran rather than we deliberated. Imran will review once the review. Look, we're not finished on the standard yet. I don't want to recast the board discussion. Imran raised a question on 45A. in the context of the application of documentation. I think that's how we should deal with it. I do think, as I understand, there is a specific paragraph in 220 that deals with the engagement partner. I think that may be useful to get that clarification. And Billy, if you want to come in on anything else here to help sort of cast what the options are. Imran, are you fine with that? I think it's awkward to go back to 45A discussion.
Absolutely, I think that would be unfair to go back.
Full airing. Where we landed is that there's openness to refinement and consideration of application material, barring unintended consequences on that.
Thank you, Tom. I'll review the tape and
yeah. I think that's better. Vili, do you want to comment?
Sorry, just switching between screens. No, Tom, I'm happy with how you've explained 45A, that how we will take that forward. I think Dan might want to come in on the group engagement partner point.
Thank you. Dan?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And just a further point on to address Imran's question on the responsibility of the group engagement partner. It does start as Len said with paragraph 6 of this standard, which provides the linkage to 220 and the usage of the references to the responsibilities of the group engagement partner versus the group auditor. But I would also point to paragraph 12, which is the overall responsibility for the group engagement partner with respect to quality on the engagement. That's the umbrella requirement that covers a lot of the more detailed requirements, including paragraph 23, which we talked about in the discussion on paragraph 45A. And that is specifically directed also at the group engagement partner taking responsibility for the nature, timing, and extent of the direction, supervision, and review. Therefore, the kind of at a higher level, the group engagement partner does have that overall responsibility. And then, Tom, you mentioned the linkage, additional linkage to ISO 220 revised would be in paragraph 32 of that standard, which requires the engagement partner before the report is issued to be satisfied that sufficient appropriate audit evidence has been obtained to support the conclusions reached and that the report can be issued. So I think all of those work together to highlight the importance of the role and responsibilities of the group engagement partner.
Okay. Imran, would you like to come in?
I appreciate all of those clarifications. Thank you. My point was, though, a direct one. On the reading of 57 and the application material, is it possible that the engagement partner has to produce no documentation because the responsibilities sit elsewhere? And could the engagement partner then take me on the trip through all the paragraphs that you went to justify why her fingerprints are not on the file in respect of documentation?
Really, I think you're coming in to respond to Imran's point.
Yeah, maybe to respond and maybe just to understand the question. I think what Dan was trying to explain is that the engagement partners' direct responsibilities reside in ISO 220, and those responsibilities always have to be complied with. When we look at the documentation section, our construct throughout our ISOs is always that the documentation section is cast in the auditor shall ensure that the following is documented. So I think my question, Imran, is I think there's little we can do in terms of how we set up paragraph 57, because that is how we've constructed in our standards. So I think my question is, would it help if we draw out that link in application material? I'm not saying it's possible. I'm asking would it help you if the task force takes that away and look at that?
Thank you. Through you, Chairman. Thank you, but I appreciate it. But at the same time, I'll have another look at it.
Sorry, Imran, you've cut in and out.
I'm sorry. I said, really, thank you for that. At the same time, I'll have another look at it and see if I have any other
ideas. Veli, did you hear that?
I think Imran said he appreciates that the task force will have a look at it, and he will also have a look at it again on his side.
Okay, yeah, I could.
Yes. That's what I said. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. You just cut out a little bit at the end, but Billy clearly has better ears than I do. Okay.
Willie, thank you for coming in, because when I look at the entire body of ISAs, we don't have specific documentation requirement for the engagement partner. So I think your suggestion is perhaps in application material to bridge that gap or draw a link to explain it. I think that'll be helpful, because since we don't have a specific documentation requirement anyway in the body of ISA dealing with engagement partner, it will be very hard for us to write something in 57. But I think your suggestion is very helpful. At least something for task force to consider and be responsive to everyone's concerns. So well, thank you for that, Willie. Appreciate the timing injection into our discussion. In terms of other comments we heard, clearly people are looking for more guidance, examples. But just couple of thoughts. The documentation is, as a task force has discussed in our task force meeting, that whether it's going to be implementation guidance outside the standards, non-authoritative guidance. This is one area that clearly is on our task force work item. So I'm not sure how detailed, how much guidance we can build into already, we triple the size of the application material from the XN 600, and also adding more complexity. So we were conscious on the length, complexity, and all the balance it with all the cost for additional guidance. So we'll work with the staff and Willie in terms of what we need to be, what should be in the standards and what should be as part of the implementation material for ISA 600. So we take all that comments calling for additional guidance. Would consider that. I think Dan, you had comments about documentations is evidence to support the audit opinion. I think in some of the paragraphs in ISA 600, for example, paragraph 49 and elsewhere in 220, I think actually has some language in there. But we'll take a look, maybe can whether we can explain better in that section. But I think that's been all along, that any engagement, whether it's group audit or single entity audit, the documentation to support the audit's opinion. So thank you for that. I'm just trying to go through any other thing. I think Isabel, your comments about reciting, retaining, we'll go back and look at clean some of the language to be consistent. I think we addressed 123B, and there were a couple other comments on A24 and from Chinwei and Sue. We'll go back and look at that. Tom, and this is such an important section. Just want to see if any other board members have any view, even if they have no significant comments. Would be good to hear whether they're supportive.
maybe let me, you haven't commented on the document yet, but are supportive and have no other comments, you could sort of raise your hands digitally. I'll note your support for the record. So if Kai, Fernando, Sashika, Chanwei, Julie, Lynn, Wendy, I think the others have either spoken with their support with suggestions or are members of the task force. So I think you get a pretty good steer. You have a couple of issues, as you talked about, try to address and runs to further point, maybe through guidance. I think we're moving in the right direction on this one. It seems like we're being responsive to the public interest comments that we've received on documentation. So I congratulate the task force for their work. I think that gets us through the standard. We have more to go. And we'll do that after the break. But could I do one thing before the break? Billy, my understanding is we need to approve the minutes for previous meetings, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, the minutes for March, April, and May have now been posted and both marked in clean form. Could we seek an omnibus approval of all three now? Anyone object? Lower your hands, because unless you're objecting. I see no objections. So with that, I'm passing the minutes are approved for the March, April, May as posted yesterday evening, somewhere around 5:48 at my time. So those are approved. Let's take a break. Let's reconvene at 20 minutes to the hour, 8:40 my time. So 14-minute break, and then we'll return with the remaining issues. Great discussion so far. Thanks. We'll start in 2 minutes. Okay, if people could so begin rejoining. Okay, let's start up. Len, back to you for the remaining topics.
Thank you, Tom. Again, thank you for the discussions on documentation. It's such a high priority public interest comments. I'm glad we had a full discussions. And as I said yesterday, we're in code orange, and it's very good to hear from in terms of your support. Also, some of the comments that raised by everyone for us to continue to work on providing a close to final draft for the September meeting. So thank you very much. In terms of continuing in our discussions, we're going to be looking at this heat map again. I think we've gone through the key ones so far, risk-based approach, documentation, and so the next section is going to be on some of the new issues we have not discussed with the board since the close of the exposure draft. So Michelle, next slide, please. So this is one area we heard in the ED process that in a group audit situation, the component auditor might be performing audit for another purpose, and how to, in terms of using the evidence from that particular engagement, how to, in such a certain situation, there might be works that may not be repeated. We had a paragraph 42 in the exposure draft dealing with that specific situations, and based on a lot of comments received from practitioners, especially that there might be languages in that area cause confusion, was not very helpful. So the task force took another look and made suggestions, as you can see in the issues paper. And another point I want to make is, I think Kai Morton raised it yesterday at the beginning of the call, is this is also one of the, from his perspective, this is one of the public interest comments we need to address. In practice today, that component auditors, they don't just perform audit procedure on behalf of the group auditor. There are audits done for other purposes. As a public interest comments that we need to address some of the practical issues dealing with audits for group and audits for other purposes. The task force had a full debate, and our position has been ISA 600 is focusing on group, managing audit engagement and achieving a high quality group audit engagement. The focus is on a group audit. Of course, there are certain practical issues we need to address based on the comments we received. So we made some suggestions and provided task force views in the issues paper. And hopefully we can get board's feedback and that direction forward. So with that, Tom, happy to hear board's views and comments on this area.
Thank you. Any comments? Sue.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Len. I think it's a good summary of clearly a very complex area, and I think I support the task force recommended way forward. I think it's probably on balance the best approach. I think though, just a couple of points. There is some really good material in the application material that was with the exposure draft. So I think it would be really valuable not to lose that. I think you made a suggestion about non-authoritative material. I think that would be very helpful in practice because, as you've explained, there's lots of variation. And I've also raised a few comments on the offline comments around where you've had an audit that's already been completed perhaps in advance of the group audit, and the work there is used. And perhaps again reflecting that in some of the guidance as to how in practice that work can still be used, particularly in areas where there are statutory audits. But overall, support the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Sachiko?
Thank you. Similar to Sue, I support the task forces on the way forward. I think this is a very balanced and good proposal. And with regard to the proposed wording that could be added after paragraph A8, I think it is useful to add the phrase something like, but the requirements of this either nevertheless apply. This phrase is included in paragraph 3 of the extant 600, and I think this message is very important to retain. That's all from me. Thank you.
Chumley?
Thank you, Tom. Like others, I'm supportive of what the task force has proposed. I do think it is more of a practical implication arising from applying our risk-based approach. So, pulling it out, putting it in the application material, and then having more extensive implementation guides will be appropriate, and I think quite important. I think it is a very common and very real issue. So I think in the paper, the task force say that they will consider non-authoritative guide. I actually think that it is crucially important to have those things and to more fully explain and discuss all the issues that the respondents has highlighted to us through the responses. So I'm supportive of that. I just want to also add, I'm quite pleased with the neutral tone that the proposed draft application material is carrying, and I hope that such neutral tone is actually carried over to the implementation guide so that such situation is not viewed as an undesired inconvenience. So that'll be all. Thanks.
Thanks. Julie?
Yeah, Tom, I'm in the same place. I think what we had in paragraph 42 was problematic and could have been open to misuse. And I think what the task force has proposed makes sense. I don't think we're saying that there's a prohibition from using work that might be being done for 2 audits, at the same time for multiple purposes, but it's not really in the scope of 600 to talk about how to use that audit evidence in both places. So I think where you've landed is a good place.
Thank you. Kai?
Tom, thank you very much. I remember that we have a similar discussion yesterday, so I would like to repeat that I agree very much with the summary of the respondents' comments on using the work on an audit performed for another purposes. Furthermore, given the importance of statutory audits in the European Union, I very much support including in the application material the words as proposed by the task force to use audit evidence from an audit firm for another purpose, which I believe is very much in the public interest. So consideration may be given to augmenting these words by stating that the group auditor is nevertheless required to meet the requirements of ISO 600, including in relation to direction, supervision, and a review of the work of the component auditor. Thanks very much, Tom.
Thank you. Diane?
Thank you. And just to chime in, I think everything that everybody's brought up is right on. I just encourage the task force to obviously think about the practicality of the operationalization of some of these things. When you start to use audit evidence for maybe two different audits, one might be for a statutory audit, one might be for group reporting. Obviously, the role of materiality becomes really important because whether that evidence is fit for purpose and at the right precision level. So that will come back to materiality. So obviously just that was one of my notes, was just hopefully through the application material, give some guidance on the role of materiality. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. Kai?
Thank you, Tom. I'm also very happy with the suggestion from the board here, and think it with some of the additions that Kai-Uwe mentioned may be even strengthened and helped. So thanks.
Okay. Helpful suggestions in addition to general support. Anyone have slightly different point of view? I don't see any hands, so Len, take that as support for the general direction with some suggestions.
Yeah. Thank you very much. That was very helpful. It's as Kai said, Kai-Uwe and Martin said, it's a key public interest comments, and the task force had a full debate and made recommendations in the issues paper. So I'm very happy that support and also retain some of the languages in application material. On the guidance, Sue, Dan, and Cheng-Wei, I think this is something we're thinking about. Perhaps this is non-authoritative guidance. We'll work with the staff in terms of how to bridge that gap and improve practice. So your helpful comments we'll take that on board as the staff develop implementation materials. Thank you very much. Tom, so if no other comments, we'll move to the next section. So the next section, it deals with professional skepticism, and this is one area I think we kind of touched on yesterday in the introduction, but just want to emphasize that this is another key public interest comments. I think, as I said at the beginning yesterday, all the public interest comments are getting full attention and debate and discussions at the task force meeting. And this is one area that a number of monitoring group members have raised. So a number of suggestions and changes to highlight the importance of exercising professional skepticism, taking some of the languages we have used, especially in ISO 220. That's where a lot of work has been done, and incorporate them into ISO 600. So I think some members already commented on yesterday. I think Cheng-Wei and others have made helpful suggestions, but I think it probably deserves some special attention at a board session, because the attention by the public interest stakeholders and monitoring group members. I just want to see if there are any other additional comments that board members would like to provide to the task force.
Okay, any comments? Len?
Thank you, Tom. Len, this is an area you and I have emailed about, and I think it's one that the Professional Skepticism Working Group should have a final look at before the September meeting. And so we intend to do that. So we'll be in touch regarding that in the near future. Obviously, the fact that it's based on 220, I'm reasonably comfortable with it. I'd just like the working group to pass its eye over it as a group. Thank you.
Okay. I see no other hands, Len, so we could proceed.
Okay, thank you, Tom. I think, Lynn, thank you very much. I think Brett and also Jasper now is going to be supporting the professional skepticism working group. So we'll definitely get back to you and get your input on the specific wordings in the ISA 600 draft. The next section is the other issues, other topics that the task force have spent time analyzing some of the questions, responses to the questions in the ED. Again, I apologize for the volume of the paper you received for this meeting, and also NIVO response summaries that coming through to your emails, and so appreciate you spend time going through them. There were some specific questions as outlined on the slides. You can see, separate sections to highlight the importance and the work of the component auditors, also for scalability issues. Other area, common controls and centralized activities. Commenters asking for more guidance in application materials, and some of the practical challenges on risk-based approach that we've been spending a lot of time since the December meeting, deal with some of the risk-based approach, and just want to see also, in addition to the questions, the summary we provided to you, are there any other matters that as a due process questions we have not addressed them, or any other matters that the board member would like the ISA 600 task force to consider, in addition to all the questions in the ED and all the topics we have discussed since the December meeting. That'll be helpful because, as I said, it's a code orange, and it's important that we hear from you. Any other matters we may not have the chance to discuss, or not being tabled at the as part of questions in the exposure draft. So with that, I think Tom is offline at the moment. So I guess Willie will. Oh, well, Tom's back. Okay. So Tom, happy to take comments from the board.
Great. Okay. On these further questions, any comments? Diane?
I have one, and I'm sorry to say it's in the other. So I know it's pretty far down the list of items, but it's on letterbox. So, I read what you all had written. You said, would be, they would be supportive and would like to update the staff practice alert, obviously understanding resourcing and timing and commitments and all the other things we just went over. But I do think letterbox audits continue to be a challenge. They are something that we are principally focused on. I spent a lot of my time thinking about even client acceptance and, the risk evaluation of those types of audits. So I would just put a vote in if I could, not to lose sight of the letterbox audits. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Len, would it be inappropriate here to highlight the last question on the page?
Yeah, it's, you know, the last questions on in issues papers, you know that whether there are any issues raised by respondents in addition to those summarized by the task force in agenda item 4B that the task force should further consider.
And this is really important just to make sure we're achieving the goals of our due process. I don't see any hands raised here, so Sue?
Sorry, it's possibly a question for Len, and apologies if I've missed it, but it was really just a question around the progress in relation to the IAASB deliberations in relation to engagement team definition and whether that has any impact here.
Well, the engagement team definition that's you know sits on 220. I think the questions I think you're asking is about IAASB's project in dealing with independence related to the group audit situations. Thank you. I think this is one area between now and September. There'll be a lot of work. Just to give you some idea that. The full task force of the IAASB group audit project and ISO 600 task force, the task force will meet together as one group in the next month or so, and there will be additional meetings scheduled between the chair of the two task force and the staff, and we at least had a number of calls already in terms of try to understand their issues and our issues, and also try to align the timeline. They cannot move forward until ISO 600 is finalized. So they plan their exposure draft to be approved in December 2021. At the same time, we approve our final standards. So based on what we have in 600, they will take forward and propose that as ED. So of course, there's still some coordination needs to be done in terms of the wordings in ISO 600 they're happy with, and they can take it forward in their project. But we do expect to provide probably a more robust, I guess, issues paper on this area come September meeting. This is one remaining area that we need to deal with the IAASB. But at least I'm pretty encouraged, but of course Dan and Jasper, feel free to come in. I think we are pretty much aligned in terms of what we need to accomplish between the two groups. I think from my perspective, I think the timing is about right because they just had their board meeting last week on this matter. They're getting direction from their board. So it is a good time to start looking at the drafting and try to go through the details. Dan and Jasper, I know you have a number of discussions offline with the IAASB staff. So would you like to come in, or Willie? You're involved.
So I think Billy is positioned to update.
No, that was a good summary by Len. I just wanted to also just reiterate that there's really been very close coordination at the staff level throughout. I think Jasper meets with the staff team on IAASB side once every 2 weeks. So we've really been staying close. And as Lena said, in Q3, there will also be the joint meeting between the two task forces.
Great. By no other hands do am I fair in saying that there are no other issues that have been raised by respondents that the task force should consider based upon your current reading of the situation. Okay, the record notes that. Len, back to you.
Well, thank you very much for all the discussion and support. And Dan, just real quickly on letterbox, I think this is something that we'll work with the staff with additional guidance is needed. I think before the formation of the task force and when the group audit was still a working group, there was some guidance issued by the working group to address letterbox. We'll go back and look at that guidance based on the development and evolution of this project, whether anything need to be added. And so we'll work with the staff on that. So we'll take note. That was also in the IAASB letter as well. So at some point we need to get back to them as well on that. So appreciate it. In terms of next step, I think by the time we go to September, we'll probably be between code orange and code red. So in September, we plan to bring a close to final draft for final standards for your comments. There are a number of issues that, in addition to IAASB that Sue raised, clearly a lot of work for us in the coming month. But also we'll be working with the CUSP working group in terms of see if there's anything we could do, but with the focus is to get 600 out in December. And another area is I think it really came through from the offline comments. There might be some language, editorial comments, consistencies. We need to go through them, and my task force has already planned a number of meetings coming up and sacrificing the European holiday period. So thank you to my task force members. But we look forward to continued engagement, and also we will have a session with CAG in September before the main meeting September. So we're likely to get a clear direction and feedback from CAG as well. Of course, we'll continue to work with our regulatory community stakeholders in terms of based on what we heard this week on documentation on paragraph 45A, professional skepticism, to make sure that they also are up to date in terms of the board discussion. So with that, I think all the board members, there's a lot of paper material in addition to LCE. So I do appreciate you spending the time provide us with clear directions, and also again the quality of the offline comments. It's been pretty amazing. So thank you for spending the time sending them through. Tom, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. Any other comments on 600 related matters? Michael and Jim, any perspectives from PIOB and CAG?
Tom, I just say we look forward to having that discussion in September.
Yeah, I'd say good progress, and it looks like things are moving forward. And I guess I would just encourage the task force as they're thinking about how to work things into the draft, that if you're uncertain whether something ought to be a requirement or be application guidance, that erring in the direction of including a requirement would probably be preferable. Not to make the ISA onerous, but because the practitioners are likely to give more attention to requirements than they are to the guidance. And for example, in the development of methodologies, firms are more likely to build the requirements into their methodologies as well. So I would encourage you to keep that in mind.
Great. Thank you all. Now, Len, I'm going to take a quibble with your interpretation. You think you're going to code red. Based upon the progress we're making, I prefer the other direction, thinking that we're getting a code green, because we're getting to near completion of the standard, and I'm seeing some of the challenges start to dwindle away. That doesn't mean that we have more to go. So, but remain very sort of more than cautiously optimistic that we're going to resolve the remaining challenges. So we're going towards green.
Yeah, it's code green for the board, for the task force. It's code red. So yes, I think I can't speak for my task force, but I think we're very encouraged by the feedback this week. So we really appreciate all the support.
Okay, that's great. Any other comments before we close today? Vili, anything from staff perspective you want to raise?
No, nothing at this stage, Tom. I think it's now all focus on LCE as Bev and Kai has updated us this morning.
Right. Okay. Well, it gave us a pretty clear path forward for us on LCE. Lots of work to do. Let's give them an extra hour to start working away. And I'll bring this session to the close. We've had a really productive week. I really like the debate we're having at this board now. I think we had some good input to the task force as a working group. So I wish you a very nice weekend when you're not reading LCE documentation. But we'll see you next week. Lots of reading to do, and feel free to reach out if you have any comments. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.